One more housekeeping thing. If you guys have questions, we're going to have a whole question thing at the end. You're welcome to type things in the chat. I am just going to go through my flow and through my PowerPoint so that I make sure I sort of get all of my ideas out, and then we'll go to the questions at the end. So if there's something that pops into your head about, like slide 3 or whatever, go ahead and feel free to type that in the chat at that time, but I will not go back and address it until the end, just to get through. I want to make sure I get through all of the information. And so we'll just have any questions at the end. I'm also going to give out my personal contact information. So if you want to follow up with me about something training wise or whatever, you're welcome to reach out to me on an individual basis. Cool. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and get this here PowerPoint going, I hope. Hold on. Coming up, I hope. I actually practiced this, but here we go. Okay. I think you can see this. Cool. So I'm just going to run through things. A lot of what I'm going to give you, the information wise, is actually from Jack Daniel's book. So this is a quote from his book. I'm not going to run through all of these points and just read the slides, because I will send the slides out. So if there's anything you're like, oh, what was that on the first slide? You can read this on your own time. I'm going to send it out to you so you can do it individually. I just want to make sure we get through all of the super important stuff. So this is Jack Daniel's Basic Laws of Running, and I think it's super helpful. There's 12 of them, as you can see. They're really cut and dried, straightforward. But this is in his book, and if you haven't read it, and you might want to, we're going to be covering a lot of the information in his book here. So this is about me. As you guys know, I'm the Whippets coach. I also coach privately individuals. And so, as I was saying before, I am going to be showing a lot of the slides, the actual information from VDOT. That will be from my personal account or from people that I'm coaching. And so their names will not be disclosed, but I have their data to share in here. I am VDOT certified, which is a whole other test that I had to do. And so these are the other certifications I have. I do a lot of marathons and half marathons, and I've done all these other races, but I really focus on the marathon and the half. And that's my website if you want to check it out later. These are the 4 main topics that we're going to go over. As I said, we're going to cover everything really in detail about VDOT, the apps that VDOT has, how to use them, how to go over your stats and all of that information. And then at the end, we'll have Hey, I'm back. We're off to a great start, guys. Thanks for sticking in. I think I was getting some messages that the internet wasn't working. So let's see if it's going to work now. Let's try again. I didn't get very far, so that's good, I guess. Okay. Here we go. Back into the slideshow. Your screen sharing is paused. Why? Suggest turning off video. I'm going to turn off the video. Thank you for that tip. Okay. Can you see my screen? It's loading. Thanks for all of these messages. Why is this not working? I am screen sharing, it says. Okay. Wow, we're doing great.
Maybe if you keep it, like this, just the slides, maybe the issue is with.
Okay, let's do that. Thank you for all of these ideas. I appreciate this. I appreciate yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. Cool. So we're just going to do like this, low key, non-tech. All right. So, as I was saying, this is, we're going to cover some of Jack Daniels and the running formula. Jack Daniels is the person who created the VDOT tables. So this is why you're going to hear the name Jack Daniels a lot. He is a coach. He's still alive. He was born in 1933. He did a lot of research and gathered a lot of data and a lot of research, and that's how he came up with the VDOT tables through studying a bunch of runners and a bunch of athletes over many years. So this is his book. The first one came out in 1998, and then there's a fourth edition which just came out last year. And so there's been a little bit of updates here and there, but the tables were from the beginning. And he actually worked on that with this guy Jimmy Gilbert, who was a runner, and then who went on to work for NASA. He was very good with data science, and so with him, they're the two of them that the two of them together, I'm sorry, came up with the tables themselves. So we're going to go over, I have here listed just some definitions, so that we all sort of know what things mean when we talk about it. So VO2 max is the volume of oxygen consumed per minute. VO2 max is the velocity of running at VO2 max. This is a concept that Daniels based the VDOT tables on. It's not VO2 max on its own. It's VO2 max, which is the velocity of running at VO2 max. I'm going to get a little bit into the weeds with some of this conversation because a lot of this is based on physiology and the study of science and study of running. So we're going to get a little bit into the weeds, so just bear with me a little bit. And then running economy, which is a very important aspect of this. That means the relationship between run speed and energy required. And that is a trainable thing, right? So the more you run and the better you get at running, the more economical you are at running. And so that's something we're going to go into here with these tables. So the VDOT score, if you use VDOT at all, and I hope that the people on here have at least some familiarity with it, but if you've used it at all, you know that you have a VDOT score. And so the score, as you probably know, is based on a race result. One of the things that is important about using VDOT is the quality of that score and the quality of the race result. So this has been defined, how the type of race result you want to use, right? Ideally, you can put in any race you've done in there, one you didn't train for, one that, went really terribly, one that was in, a monsoon. You can put all of those scores in, but the formula and the training ideally is built on these principles, and I've laid them out here. So what you really want is you want a race that you've trained for, one that you've prepped, that you had weeks of like specific training geared around. You want it to be a race that is tapered. So ideally, as I said here, it's not the 5K that you did in the middle of the marathon block, because that is not an example of a true race effort, right? That doesn't mean that there isn't value to that, but in terms of using that race for a VDOT score, ideally you're not using that for the VDOT score. The other principle is you want it to be a recent race result. So, you know, recent can mean a lot of different things, but I do know some people that are like trying to use like their PR, which was like 3 years ago. That's not at all recent. So I would say don't do that. Even though it's a good, like, what you want it to be is representative of where you are here and now and semi-current, right? So the 3 years ago PR where you were like doing really awesome is not necessarily, and probably is not that related to where you are at present time. The other thing is you want it to be ideally in sort of decent conditions. That doesn't mean it has to be perfect, because that would be like 1% of all races probably. But you know, an extreme example we had recently was New York City Marathon, just this past year. So those conditions were definitely extreme conditions, right? So that time was not indicative of your training and your best race for anybody, because of the conditions. And then the last thing is also super important, but ideally the time that you use is correlated to the race that you're training for, to whatever you have coming up, whatever your next goal is, right? So, you know, it's perfectly fine to put your Fifth Avenue mile time into VDOT, but using your Fifth Avenue mile time to then set your paces for the marathon, it's not ideal. The reason being, as I say here, it's 26 times. That's a huge gulf of difference, right? So for something like a marathon, you really want to use something like a half, because that's close to the same distance and has some of the same similar demands and requirements in terms of your body. You know, something, if you're going to go for like a 5K, it's like, oh, well, you know, use something around the 5K time that you're training for. Because as you'll see as we go along, there is correlation and causation with the score in terms of what you've been training for, what type of body you are, what your skill sets are, what your musculature is, and all of these certain things, right? But if you can use these different qualifiers to determine the quality of your score, it is beneficial, right? So the better score you have, the more accurate score, the better your paces can be, the more accurate the data can be, right? So this little chart over here, which I think is really interesting, it just shows these are 3 runners that were tested in the lab, and they all have 3 different, completely different VO2 maxes. But they also have completely different running economies, but they have roughly the same VDOT score. So this is just an example of how people can be, you know, different in many ways, but also race with the same times and in the same manner. So that's a cool little chart there. I'm just going to check in on the chat. Oh, okay. Next. Okay. So in short, the race time, VDOT represents performance. That's the idea of it, right? It represents what is possible. So it should reflect your max, your economy, your threshold, and your mental approach all in one measure, right? This is the idea of it. And I have the little star here that says regardless of age or sex, but the next panel I'm going to show you is a chart where Daniels has made some correlations between the different scores and age or sex. But your VDOT score itself, whatever that number is, does not take into account your age or sex, right? So it's absolutely true that, you know, the elite men are faster than the elite women. The best of the best men are faster than the best of the best women, right? This is because of different bodies and physiology, frame, hearts, lungs, all of these different things. And so those two scores are different. But you can correlate between them, and I'll go into that in the next bit. But before we get to that, one thing I want to just point out here, it's in this gray box at the bottom. The difference in physiological values between two runners. Sorry, let me go back. Sometimes the difference in physiological values between two runners is a function of inherent capabilities, and other times it is a result of the training that has been emphasized, right? So that's where I was going back when I was saying correlation and causation, right? Sometimes it's just, oh, you are really better at endurance versus raw speed. But there's also a time where, you know, you've just spent all of your time training for distance and endurance events versus you've spent a lot of your time training for, you know, short sprinty type fast races, right? So there's a difference there between the two, and sometimes it's hard to distinguish them. Oftentimes I'd say it's hard to distinguish them. But this is something to keep in mind when you're looking at your score, and also keep in mind you will have multiple scores. Okay, so I'm just gonna throw this in quickly for people who may be older, me, or you know. So Daniels has made a correlation between different ages and different sexes and their performance outcomes. And the way he's done that with the score is every score is given a level. And as you can see here, so the time for a female to be what's considered elite level, the VDOT for what's considered a female at elite level is a 66.6, whereas for a male, it's a 75. And so that carries on through all of the different levels. There are 10 levels total. As you can see here, he breaks it down to novice, intermediate, good, and elite. And then in terms of age, it's a, you know, fact of life. But as you get on the other side of the hill, you know, the performance possibilities start to, you know, decrease over time or become more difficult. And so he has broken down as well the score for people starting from the age of 39, and he goes all the way through, I believe 80 in the book. But none of us on the team are that old, so we don't need to know about that right now. Okay. This is I've taken this from the VDOT, from some of the runners I'm coaching. This is a variety of scores that they've put together. So there's two sections in VDOT where you can store things. And I do recommend using this feature. One is for personal records, where you can keep track of what your score was for each time, what your best score was for each time. And then the other section is the recent races. And as you can see, it lists the date, which is important. and then the distance, what your pace was, and then you can see right there, there's a score for each of these, and each of these VDOT scores is different, right? The colors, the little bands around those colors, that differentiates the level. So going back here, these levels 1 through 10, as a coach, I look at this. You can look at this yourself as well. You can decode it. But so both of these pink scores are in the same level. Both of these orange scores are within the same level. What you'll notice, and it's good to keep this in mind as I was saying before about, is your skill trained skill, or is it an inherent skill that you were born with and that's your natural gifted ability? Or is it a mix of both? But you'll see, so each of these scores for each distance is slightly different, right? And some people are very clearly, they trend to have much higher scores in, you know, the shorter distance races, and some people trend to have the higher score in the longer distance races. That is not as common, but it does happen. So use this information to keep track of where you are, where you've been, what types of skill sets do you have, slash, was that score indicative of the training that went into it, right? Ask yourself this. Those are the questions to ask yourself. So as I was saying about the scores, a lot of people, it's more common for people to have a higher score on the shorter races. That is more common. The reason being, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that, I lay them out here. So you can just race a lot more. You know, like if your distance is a 5K, you can race that a whole heck of a lot more than you can a marathon, because of the recovery needed to go into it, because of the amount of buildup that you have to put on the front end to go into it, right? So part of the reason for having a higher score on something like a 5K is just because you've done it more times, right? You've had more shots at it. The other thing is that in terms of scores, for the difference between, you know, bad conditions in a short race, maybe totals up to seconds, 2 seconds, milliseconds, possibly. But bad conditions for a marathon or a half, those end up being multiple minutes. And so all of that is reflected in your score, right? The other thing that has a big impact on your score, especially for longer races, are things like nutrition, dehydration, gut issues, and as I say here, random bad luck. But the longer you're out there, the longer you're subjected to all of these things that you can't control, the longer you have to, you know, try to keep from puking when you feel like you're going to puke. It's a lot harder to do that over the course of 3 to 4 hours, as opposed to, you know, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And so all of these things are factors in your score, right? So it doesn't mean just because, the reason I say that is because some people are like, well, my marathon score sucks, so obviously I can't run marathons, so I should just quit. That's not actually what you should take away from this. It just means that they're different, right? So it's hard to compare them apples to apples, just in terms of like, hey, I got a 45 on this and I got a 50 on that. Okay. This, I forget why I included this. This is more about training. I remember why. So this little chart down in the bottom is about taking a break from training and building up building up to training. And so all of this is about the idea of current fitness, right? So in order to continue to build fitness, you need to continue to have stimulus. You need to continue to have a stressor. And so your score will change over time, period. Your score changes if you're training, your score changes if you're not training, right? Because the idea of the score is that it is based on your current fitness as best you can estimate, right? So if, say, you're a person who, had a really great score, last spring, and then you took a really, you took, all the holidays off and you didn't do a fall race, that score is not where you are now, right? Because you took some downtime, and there are many reasons to take downtime. So that's not, you shouldn't look at it as a negative, but you just want to know that then when you get back into training and you're looking at your paces, that's your pace from whatever, the spring. Okay. The same thing happens as you are training, right? So as you're going along and you're building up fitness, the idea is that you are becoming more fit over time. And so your score would then increase over time. Some of this is really hard to estimate. And the reason that I can get into all of this is because I'm the coach for people and I can be like the bird's eye objective view. It's really hard to have that objective view when the person is you. And so what I would say about changing your score a lot on your own is just be cautious about that. I would be very careful about making any really big drastic changes in any direction, plus or minus. Okay, now we're going to go into a little bit about what's in the app. So Daniel's, his whole, VDOT is one thing, but the other part is called the running formula. And so this is his formula, and these are the paces that Daniel's has outlined. And these are the paces that are inherent in the app. You can add anything you want in there. You can put your own paces in there. If you've played around with it yourself in the coaching or creating workouts part, you can make any pace you want. But these are the Daniel's paces. And they are all based on a percentage of your VO2 max. And you can see the percentages here. And then he has formulas for about when you use them and how you use them. You probably don't need to know this if you have, because the Whippets plan is just given to you. And so we've already figured all of this part out, but I just show you that so you know where things are coming from, right? The idea is that each pace is with a certain goal in mind, with a certain outcome, right? So when your plan calls for easy pace, we are trying to train a certain thing. Even with easy runs, there is a purpose to easy runs, and there is something that we are trying to train. So if you go out and you run your easy run at a marathon pace, you are not doing the training appropriately. You're not getting the desired outcome. You're training something else, right? If I can use an example from let's use the gym as an example. So if I was to go to the gym and, I was like, I want to have bigger biceps, but I spent the whole time doing squats, I would not have bigger biceps. You understand, right? Because it's like, I did nothing involved with my arms at all. I'm not going to get bigger biceps from doing squats. And so that's the same idea. all of these paces, all of these workouts are designed to do a specific certain thing. And so when you see that, know that there's a reason for that, for what is being called for. Okay, that's my coaching rant. Now we'll go into the application. So there are several ways that you can use VDOT. One is on the computer, and that's just on the online browser. If everybody has the ability to do that with any profile, the Whippets team or whatever, or your own, that's all online. Also on your phone, they have an app. The third thing is, and that I don't think a lot of people know about, but there is a VDOT app for your watch if you own a Garmin or a Coros. This is a beautiful tool. I do recommend you download this. What it does is it gives you your paces and it gives you your training calendar directly to your watch. You don't have to reference any other thing anywhere. All you have to do is press run on your watch, and your watch will say, do you want to run the designated, the scheduled workout for today, is what it says, the scheduled run for today. And then your run will go through, even if it's just an easy run, it'll say easy run, 8 miles, and then it'll give a pace range. And that pace range will correspond to what your personal VDOT easy pace range is. And for workouts, it'll go through every step of the workout, and it'll say, if it's warm up 2 miles, it'll have warm up 2 miles on your watch. And then it'll go into whatever the next step of the workout is. If it's 400 repeats, and then 200 recovery, it will go through all of those steps for you, step by step. You don't have to figure anything out. You don't have to program it or punch anything in. All you have to do is download the app and have the training sync to your calendar. So I do recommend that. It's available here in this for Garmin. It's in the IQ store, and it's very simple. The other thing, this is a side note, but if you want to play around with different scores or look up what different scores would elicit in terms of training times or training paces, or race times, then there is a separate app for that. And that's called the VDOT Pace Calculator. This is a picture of it here. It's green. And it's the same VDOT logo, but green. And it says, it's called VDOT Calculator. That's a separate thing, sort of, if you just want to play around with things and look at what would this half marathon, what would my half marathon PR from 3 years ago, what time, what number would that give me? Those kinds of things. Now we're going to go into what you can actually see in the app and some of the separate pages that you can see in the app. So these are screenshots from the app. As I said before, these are primarily screenshots from my app, from my training, which is slightly different than yours. So this is wonderful. You can see here, as you can see, it has 1 week, 1 month, 6 months, and 1 year, and you can break it down and look at exactly how much time you're training at each pace. They're only going to outline those 5 Daniels paces, as I showed you before. All of the other paces that you may be doing in your training, so say if you're doing a 5K pace or a 10K pace, that will end up in this other category. My other category here was hill repeats, because I'm training for Boston, so I'm running hills out the wazoo. And so that's where that ends up, in that other category. But the important thing about this is just seeing where, do you have a distribution of paces? Ideally, you do have a distribution of paces. Sometimes we can fall out of whack, right? You missed the Tuesday workout, the last 2 weeks in a row. And so what you will see then is, you're probably missing a good percentage of a threshold pace or the marathon pace if you're training, if that's a marathon training block you're doing. And so you may then want to look at this and say, oh, I've missed those 3 days in a row, those 3 weeks in a row. So I really want to make sure I get to the next Tuesday because that's when we work on that, right? The Thursdays are going to primarily be the way the training plan, the way the Whippets training plan is broken up. The Thursday workouts are going to be more in that interval pace, repetition pace, and in the other, which was 5K, 10K paces, maybe some 3K paces and things like that. And so I just, again, you're not the coach, so you don't have to figure out that like what your percentages need to be, but no matter what you're doing, you want to have a breakdown, you want to have a mix of things. And ideally, you have a good majority of easy running. That should really be the foundation of any training. Doesn't matter what race you're training for. Easy running is the foundation. So make sure you have a good, nice majority there in this easy category. As you can see there, I do. Okay. This is on the same page. So this is the top and this is the next part down. This is the consistency and training history. This is good to sort of see where you are and see where you've been. If you don't, as I was saying before, if you've somehow missed some, like where have you missed, what have you done? Or what has your month looked like? You can see the whole total here, how many runs, the distance. You can also see the elevation and your average heart rate. You can break it down for the week, month, year, or all going back however long you've been using VDOT. One thing I do want to note here, and I say this, and I hope people listen to this, be careful about trying to make, this is mine. I have my own coach making my own plan for me every single week. And so my consistency and completion rate is 100%. That is because I literally have a person and we talk about it and we say, this is what I'm going to do on each day, right? You are not doing that. If you're following the Whippets plan, you have a plan that is not built for you. It's built for the team. And so I would not strive for 100% completion if you're following a plan that is not for you. The reason being, I like this little like, hey, listen, that's the idea of listen to your body. You need to listen to your body. You need to listen to your mind when it's saying, hey, we haven't slept enough this week, or hey, we're really stressed out, or hey, I forgot to eat, all of these things. So you need to modify on your own and be your own advocate, right? So it is good to look at these, but again, take into account all of the factors that are going on, and do not be a slave to a plan that is not your plan. So you probably don't want to aim for this 100% completion. That would be weird. This is about training accuracy here, and this is also in the app. So after you've run your workout and your data has uploaded, you can then go back and see, okay, how did I do? What was my accuracy? And it gives it, and VDOT gives it to you on the app in this nice little bullseye chart. And so you can see, this is from one of my runners. He is overall 97% accurate, 100% on distance, and 96% on pace. So that's about as good as it gets. Like, it's, he was right on it. This, you can look at this for every single run you've done. You can look at it for your easy runs. If you're running over the distance for every easy run, it's going to tell you that. If you're running too fast for all of your easy runs, it's going to tell you that. This is something you want to look at because, again, as it says right here in bold, every run and workout has a purpose. And so I sort of said that before. So if you're doing something else, then you're training something else. And maybe you're doing it on purpose, but probably you're just going along with the crowd and you don't really know why you're doing it. And so try not to do that if possible. Accuracy is important. And as I say here, I'm like the mean coach here, I guess, but a good runner is controlled, disciplined, and executes well, right? So I would rather have somebody that follows the plan and executes it really well. That's more likely to have a good outcome than somebody that's just like hit or miss and has like, oh man, I nailed that one workout and then 3 weeks go by and they were just all over the place and then they nailed one more workout. I would rather have somebody be like 90% consistent week after week after week, because that has better training outcomes. It has better race outcomes. The outcomes are better, right? So that's really what you want to do. And this is a good quote here I have here at the bottom. There's probably no particular way of training that is best for every runner. However, there are certainly basic principles that can improve different bodily functions. So, as I said before, we are trying to train certain things. It may be, if you're following the Whippets plan, it may be that there are different things that you need to train, in which case you would have to sort of figure that out on your own. But the Whippets plans are designed with certain principles in mind to train certain things and to cover certain bases to get you to perform at your best for whatever that training plan is built for. So if it's if it's the New York City half plan, then we're trying to get you to do the best New York City half. If it's the Boston Marathon plan, we're trying to get you to do the best Boston Marathon. And so just keep that in mind as you go along. And if you're doing something and you're out there running and you're like, man, I was really supposed to be running at 7-minute pace and I ended up running it at 7:40 pace. Like, these are different, these outcomes affect your body in different ways. So just keep that in mind as you go along. All right, finally, we are to the Q&A. And I have talked a lot, so I would love if somebody has any questions. Please ask.
Hey, Kristen, this is Riri. I have a question. So first of all, thank you for the presentation. I feel like having you going through the nuances of all of these different things that have been very ambiguous to me is like very, very helpful. So thank you. My question is around like easy pace. And I just find myself in general running much slower than the easy pace that the score gives me. But is that can in certain circumstances that be a bad thing, or like how should I sort of navigate how I'm feeling and like going easy based on how I feel that day versus like what the score is telling me?
So that's a great question. And I also often run slower than easy pace, especially at the beginning of my easy runs. So what I normally do, and especially too in the winter, is I usually ease my way into it and like very gradually. And that's what's good for my body. So I will have my first 2 miles or first even 3 miles be 15 20 seconds slower than where I end up finishing, and I just sort of ease my way into it. That's what works for me. I do believe that easy pace on the whole is more about how you feel, and it will change from day to day. The danger with easy pace is not really running too slow. The danger with easy pace is really running too fast, because there are certain adaptations that only come about or not only come about, but primarily come about when you're running in what's called the zone 2 or below the ventatory threshold. And so those primarily affect your heart and your lungs. And so you really want to maximize your benefits by not running too fast on those days. Slower, there's a lot of reasons that you can be running slower, even on a workout day. Conditions being one of the major ones. Temperatures high or low on either extreme, winds, bad footing, so there can be a lot of reasons to not run the designated paces. But on the whole, if you can be within a range, that's good. And so, the range, you don't have to be like the accuracy, even though it'll tell you like, oh, you're 99%. And some people are like, oh my God, I'm a failure. It's like, no, 99% is really good. Like if you're like 90s in the 90s, that's great. We're not looking for perfection because we're not robots and we're not machines. So good question. Slower is usually good and fine as long as your biomechanics are not getting like super weird and sloppy. But for the most part, most of us aren't in danger of doing that because you would have to be running several minutes slow to be doing that. So, I think on the most part, when people are like, oh, I'm really slogging through my run, what they're slogging is like, 10, 15 seconds. You know what I mean? Like, perspective is like, that's not really, that's not like slogging in terms of a pace slowdown. How often, I'm going to answer this question that James asked. How often should we be updating our score during the training program? Well, that is a very good question, and it is a semi-complicated answer because it depends on a lot of things. But Daniels does have a recommendation. And this is, again, is just like one of those blanket rules of thumb, but it's essentially every six weeks, roughly 6 to 8 weeks, you would go a half a point or 1 point greater, higher to a higher score. Again, assuming you've been training, assuming you've been following the plan, assuming you're feeling good and well and healthy and you're not feeling like run down and all of these things. These are, so there's a lot of assumptions in that, but that's his basic rule of thumb to go by. Okay, so this is a question from Paul. I'm going to read it aloud. I'm training for a 5K is use my Fifth Avenue mile time as a basis for my VDOT paces, which results in a marathon. Oh, that's a good question. So let me summarize. So Paul is training for a 5K and he's using his 1 mile time, the Fifth Avenue mile time, which is great because those are related. And what he's saying is that his marathon pace with that VDOT score is very different than his Philly half pace score. So, and he's saying which one should he use? I would use the Fifth Avenue mile paces and not try to do any conversions. The reason being that you're primarily training for the 5K, right? Which is more closely correlated to that Fifth Avenue mile pace. And so what we are assuming with the score is that your body at the 5K is more closely physiologically related to that mile pace. And so you don't really need to translate it back to a marathon because you're not training for a marathon anytime soon, and that's not what you're prepping for. Next question is, this is from Andrew. Is there a way for the VDOT app to push a recommended training calendar onto the calendar, or is this more about following the Whippets plan and using this trip? So there are a number of, this is the answer to Andrew. There are a number of there's a number of VDOT coaches that all coach in VDOT, and there's a separate marketplace called VDOT Marketplace. And I'm one of the coaches in that marketplace, but there's like a whole database, I don't know, hundreds, maybe even thousands. And so any of those coaches can create a VDOT plan for you, and they can input your training into VDOT, and you can use VDOT. And so, you know, you do not have to use the Whippets plan to use VDOT. And it's just that the majority of the people in this group are probably following the Whippets plan. So that's sort of why I touched on that one a lot. Next, what about heart rate? This is the next question. What about heart rate during easy runs? I try to hit zone 1 and 2 heart rate during easy pace, but is normally higher than that. Is there a way to improve? This is a wonderful question, and I appreciate this question. The answer to that is yes, you can improve. Yes, it is normal for your heart rate to be higher, especially as you're starting out. Aerobic fitness and your aerobic base, as we call it, takes a really, really long time to develop, like decades. And this is about, as I was saying before, you can literally change the size and shape of your heart through training. But it takes a long time, right? So you don't go run for a month and like, I trained for a month and now my heart's different. It doesn't happen that quickly, unfortunately. It takes really like, you know, focus for a big chunk of time. And so the way to get better about, or the way to have a lower heart rate overall, is to train more and to train more easy. Unfortunately, when you're starting out you know, as we know, it's very, very, your heart rate is very quick to rise. And so what's recommended to do, this is hard to do, I'm going to tell you this, and I'm sure nobody's going to do this, but what you're really supposed to do is you're supposed to run a little bit and then walk. Oh my God, we can't walk because we're runners. But you know, that's really what you're sort of supposed to do to stay in the zone. What you could do instead is, there's a couple of alternatives. One is you could put in a giant chunk of time into what we call base building. And that is very boring, but it's sort of like one of those things that it's like brushing your teeth or eating your vegetables. It's good for you in the long run. The base building, the principle of base building is like, all you do is run easy, and you run a lot of easy miles for a long time. And that will really build it up faster than if you're trying to do 1,200 other things like speed workouts and races and all of this other stuff. Due to the different stresses on the body, you can run a lot more easy miles. If you're just running easy, you can hit that volume a lot. You can make that volume a lot higher if you're not also trying to do a lot of speed work at the same time. So hopefully I answered that. That's kind of a complicated question, but I totally answered that. Okay, and then everybody else is just saying thank you, which is nice. Any other questions, any other things that like people were confused about or that I skipped over? I kind of I went into a lot of like training principles, but I hope that was useful. This is the final slide. This is just, if you want to email me, that's my contact information. If you want to email the coaches, that's the coach@dashingwhippets.org. That goes to all of the coaches, the whole, like all the team coaches. So that's like a big group of us. That's a good way to like ask things about, as I was saying, sort of like the team VDOT, because I don't have control over the team VDOT. So if you But if you have questions about that, shoot those to the Whippets email address. If you have like training questions or any of those kinds of things, I'm happy to answer that individually. You can just contact me individually about that. I guess that's it. I hope everybody's training is going well, and thanks for tuning in. Thanks for coming with all these smart questions. Yeah, happy winter, spring.